Not even a month ago, this all went down. I'm a high school senior, and I've pretty much lived my whole life in Nevada. There's not a whole lot to do around here, but one thing my friends and I have always been into is urban exploring. We'd look for abandoned buildings, old service tunnels, deserted malsonithing that felt like it had been forgotten. We'd climb over broken fences, take photos, sometimes sneak onto rooftops or down into basements. It wasn't about vandalism or doing anything illegal. It was more about feeling the vibe of those abandoned places. The one guy in our crew who always found the craziest spots was David. He's probably the quietest and most mysterious of us. He'd come up with locations none of us had ever heard of. I never even asked how he managed to find them most of the time. One day, he texted us a screenshot from some sketchy Instagram account, no followers, blurry photos, comments full of weird emojis and creepy criticisms under one post. It just said something like, "Dozens of abandoned mines in the Mojave Desert, if you know where to look." According to David, he'd been chatting with whoever was running that account, and they gave him some locations to check out. That's all he needed. He was instantly hooked. So that Saturday, it was me, David, and our buddy Mike. I had a pretty perfect off-road Jeep, so we used that, even though we didn't have an exact address, just a general area marked with a pin somewhere deep in the Mojave. The spot David had marked was way out in the middle of nowhere, miles from anything. We turned off the main road about half an hour earlier, onto a dusty dirt track that barely even looked like a road anymore. We drove around for what felt like forever. No signs, no buildings, no landmarks, just endless open nothingness. I kept checking my phone even though I knew we had no service. Mike was in back, getting more and more annoyed, telling David that this whole thing was a waste of time, probably a prank by some troll account. David insisted we keep going, so we did. He's always been stubborn about navigation, so I figured I might as well indulge him a bit longer. Finally, just as we were about to give up, Mike pointed out something off to the right. At first, I thought it was just more rocks and dirt, but as we got closer, we saw a half-collapsed wooden structure built into the side of a slope. Part of the entrance looked caved in, but through the support beams, I could see a dark hole. It wasn't massive, but it was clearly man-made, definitely a mine shaft. David didn't say anything at first. He just pulled out his phone, pulled up the offline map he downloaded before we lost service, and marked the spot with a pin. Then he turned to Mike and said, "Told you." Mike just shrugged like he'd gotten lucky, but even I had to admit, it was pretty wild. We'd been circling in the middle of nowhere and somehow found an old mine. I parked a few yards from the entrance on a flat dirt patch, then we all got out and suited up. David even brought masks for us. We went up to the shaft, and honestly, it looked even sketchier up close. David picked up a rock and tossed it inside. We waited. It clanged 3 times, then went silent. The thing was deep. David looked back at us and said, "If we trip on the way down, we're probably dead." We started descending. Luckily, the shaft didn't drop straight down. It sloped at a steep angle, but not enough to require climbing with our hands. The ground was loose and uneven, with old wooden beams lining parts of the walls. They actually looked pretty sturdy for how old they were. The deeper we went, the colder it got, and the silence down there was outright chilling. We couldn't even see light coming from the surface anymore. We finally reached what felt like the bottom. The shaft opened into a wider tunnel that branched in several directions. Everything looked just how you'd imagine: support beams every few yards, rusted rails half buried in dirt, and a thick layer of dust blanketing everything. There were bits of scrap wood and metal scattered around, probably old carts or tools. The smell was weird, like stale air or something. Honestly, I didn't realize how much we'd needed those masks until then. We picked a tunnel and started walking. We weren't searching for anything in particular. Not much was left worth taking either. Most of the stuff had been cleared out. Then we heard something. It was faint, coming from further down the tunnel. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I saw David freeze, and Mike signaled for us to turn off our flashlights. So we did, standing there in complete darkness, listening. The sound was strange, like something being dragged along the ground, metal scraping, maybe wood, or metal, I wasn't sure. It was echoing, and the closer it seemed to get, the more unsettling it was. We stood there for what felt like half a minute, maybe a whole minute, just waiting. Then Mike accidentally flicked his light on and off. That's when things got crazy. The scraping stopped, and everything went dead silent. Suddenly, from deep within the tunnel, there was a loud clang, like whatever was being dragged had just been dropped, and immediately afterward, the most awful, demonic screech I've ever heard. It barely sounded human, like some nightmare. We turned and ran faster than I've ever run in my life, not caring how loud we were. I could hear footsteps thudding behind me, and I thought I was going to lose my mind. I was in the back, trying to keep up, and then I tripped. One of my shoes slipped off, and I struggled to stay upright. I didn't have time to go back for it. I just kept moving, trying to ignore the pain in my foot. Up ahead, David and Mike had already made it up a steep incline and started climbing. I practically threw myself up those stairs. Climbing those barefoot was pain I can't even describe, absolutely excruciating. Every few seconds I'd get a splinter or a scrape, but I kept going. If it weren't for the adrenaline, I don't think I would have made it out. When I finally saw outside, I was limping bad. My foot was wrecked, and I needed both David and Mike to practically drag me over to the car. I couldn't drive like that, so Mike jumped behind the wheel. I barely got the door shut before they floored it and sped away. I don't think we were followed, but I didn't want to find out. We drove in dead silence all the way to the hospital. The pain was so intense I thought I'd pass out. I ended up getting a tetanus shot, and even after they cleaned all the splinters and treated the wounds, I couldn't walk normally for days. A few days later, Mike told us he'd lost his wallet near the mine shaft, probably when he was helping me get to the car. That he hadn't said anything at the time, but now he figured it was worth trying to go back and look for it. No way were we going back inside that place, though. We drove back out there using the pin Charles had saved, but his wallet was gone. Instead, I found something else, me shoe. It was just a few feet from the mine's entrance. I cautiously approached and picked it up. It was torn up, like something or someone had bitten into it. There were actual teeth marks in the leather, chunks missing all over. We didn't linger. None of us could explain what we saw or heard. Some might say it was some homeless person living down there, but if that was the case, how the hell had they survived so long? There was no food, no supplies, nothing that made sense. Charles said that the Instagram account never responded to his DMs, which was weird. He kept saying what happens down there is better left alone. It's been a long time since that night, but I still think about it. I don't plan on doing any urban exploring out in the desert again anytime soon. I've always been pretty rugged, love the outdoors. My idea of a vacation has always been camping or fishing, not some fancy resort. My girlfriend, Lisa, has the same love for nature, which is probably one of the main reasons we started dating. A couple of weeks ago, we decided to do something different. We packed up and drove out into the desert for a few days of camping. We'd done forests and mountains, lakes, all that, never really experienced the wide, quiet, dry solitude of the desert. It was something we both felt like we had to try at least once. We also loved stargazing, probably more than anything. Even when we first started dating, we'd drive out past town and lie on the hood of my truck, watching the stars. So when I found a remote, legal spot to camp, no amenities, just open land, some fire rings, and endless starset, was an easy choice. We drove there early on a Friday morning, taking the last hour or so on a dirt road that felt like it went on forever. Honestly, that's half the charm. No signs, no houses, just untouched emptiness. By late afternoon, we reached the spot, and it was exactly what we wanted. No people, clear skies, warm days, cool nights. We'd sit around the fire, share a couple drinks, pass around a joint, and just talk about random stuff or stare up at the sky. It was perfect, no schedules, no stress. But yeah, we heard strange noises. Not close, just way off in the distance, like a long, drawn-out howl or moan. It didn't sound like a human, it was more like an animal. The first night, we both froze and looked at each other. Tiki whispered, "Did you hear that?" And I nodded. We just shrugged it off, joked that it was probably a coyote or some mountain lion, and went back to relaxing. Same thing the second night, around the same time. We told ourselves it was just desert wildlife. I mean, there's plenty of strange sounds out here that we're not used to. It was unsettling, sure, but we didn't want to ruin the trip. But on the third night, I woke up to footsteps outside the tent. Quiet at first, just a few faint crunches like someone walking slowly on dry dirt. I held my breath, listening. It wasn't an animal, it was steady, slow. I wanted to wake Tiki, grab the flashlight, say something. Me instincts told me but I couldn't move. I was frozen, heart pounding, muscles tense. The footsteps didn't go around the tent, they just stopped a few feet away, and for a long time everything was dead silent. I stared at the ceiling, barely blinking, waiting. Then out of nowhere, I heard that sharp flick, the unmistakable sound of a lighter. A tiny orange glow appeared through the fabric, maybe waist height, a few feet to the side. Whoever was out there held the flame steady, then started waving it slowly. I didn't move, just watched, trying to stay quiet. Suddenly, the flame grew big, like a torch. Then, without warning, the person dropped whatever they were holding. I heard it hit the ground with a dull thump, and in the next second the tent lit up as the fire spread fast. That was the moment I snapped. I woke Tiki, and she instantly knew what was happening. We scrambled, no time to think, just grabbed our gear and threw everything out of the tent onto the dirt. She grabbed a water jug and started dousing the flames while I tried stomping out what I could. Eventually, we got the fire under control. Half the tent was burned, but we'd saved the rest. I grabbed my flashlight, scanning the area for whoever had tried to attack us. No one was there. At least, no one I could see. Tiki quickly packed everything up and we started running blind, not knowing the terrain, just hoping to find the truck. It was dark, no landmarks. A few minutes in, I heard that same distant scream, the one from the previous night. Suddenly now it kept going, like an animal in terrible pain. Then more screams from different directions behind us. It was obvious there were multiple things out there. I said nothing. I just grabbed Tiki's arm and moved faster. Miraculously, we found the truck. We threw all our stuff inside and I drove as fast as I could, bouncing over the rough road, trying not to flip us. Once we hit a main highway, I didn't let up. Tiki was holding it together, but I could tell she was close to crying. I was doing a terrible job trying to comfort her. We called the police to report everything. What I keep thinking is that if I wasn't such a light sleeper, or if she hadn't been with me, we might have been killed that night out in the desert. Now, I need to give you some background about my mom because it's directly connected. I've always been a little suspicious about her past. Well, not exactly suspicious, more like curious. She was born in Mexico and grew up there, in a border town in northern Mexico near Texas. Not the nicest neighborhood. She moved here alone when she was young, trying to get her college degree. That's about all I know for sure. My dad always said she had some childhood trauma, which is why she never talked about her past, just joke or change the subject whenever I asked. I believed him, at least for a long time. But as I got older, I couldn't help but wonder more. She's really good at avoiding questions about her history at family get-togethers. I do remember one thing, though. She joked that her dad's family were politicians, and her mom's were crooks, but she never said which was which. It probably was just a cynical political joke, but I started to think maybe there was more truth to it than I thought. Her dad worked in some government capacity. Her mother, she never spoke about her at all. The only other piece of info I have is a name, which I never write down. I just call him R. When I was around 10 or 11, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As I passed by the living room, I overheard my mom talking quietly, but I didn't understand Spanish. She kept repeating the name R as if she was talking about someone. All the lights were out, so I couldn't see her. I was still a little scared of the dark, so I flipped the light switch on. She didn't scream or react. She just quickly hung up the phone and gave me this intense, unfamiliar look. Told me to go back to bed. That was all I knew about her past. One last thing. About a year ago, I was driving through the desert in Arizona, just a few weeks after graduation, headed to meet an old college buddy. It was a long drive, hours of silence. Not a fan of podcasts or music, so I was calling friends, texting, whatever. I even called my mom. We both love soccer, so we started talking about the Champions League. Got serious knowledge about the sport. Out of nowhere, I see two pickup trucks blocking the road ahead. It didn't look like an accident, but I slowed down thinking maybe someone needed help. My mom was still on the line, but I didn't tell her what was happening. As I stopped the car, three men jumped out from the truck holding guns. I froze and realized there was another car approaching from behind. I was unarmed, so compliance was all I had. One man knocked on my window with his gun, signaling me to get out. I put my hands up and slowly stepped outside. By then, the other vehicle behind me had pulled up. The man barked commands in Spanish I couldn't understand. That was one of my biggest failures in life. My Spanish is terrible, especially as a Mexican American. I desperately wanted to just die right then. I watched as they took my phone, keys, wallet, everything. It looked like I was just stuck there, stranded in the middle of the desert. Then things turned even worse. One of the men got into my truck, I think, moment I realized I hadn't hung up on my mom. My truck was still running, and I saw through the window as he reached toward the screen, as if to hang up, then pulled back. I watched him listen, and I swear, he was a full conversation with her speaking Spanish. I'm about 90% sure he repeated that name R a few times, just as my mom had said it. The other guys saw what was going on and came over. They talked for a bit, then handed me back my stuff, everything except some cash. One of them looked at me, smiled with a thick accent, and said, "Tax," as they all drove off into the desert. I was honestly so relieved to lose my money. As I drove away, I kept trying to memorize their license plates, but none of the cars had plates. After a few minutes, I called my mom back demanding she tell me what really happened. She said she just threatened to call the police, that she was tracking my location and knew where I was. I told her she was full of crap and I wanted the truth. She insisted most of what she said was her pleading, that she was protecting me. I didn't believe her, but I didn't really have a choice but to accept it. I asked her to call the police and she said she would. We ended the call and I drove the rest of the way in silence. Honestly, I blocked that night out for a long time, but lately I can't push it away anymore. I keep thinking, what if my mom has some connection to a Mexican gang or cartel from her childhood? Maybe that tie didn't end when she left Mexico. She knows I'm not stupid. How much longer do I think I can keep pretending she's not hiding something? I feel like I should just ask her outright, but I'm worried about the trouble that might cause her, what kind of dark world I might be stepping into if she tells me the truth.